Hi, in this video, I want to walk you through the installation of Shopware 6. The goal is for you to know how to set up Shopware 6 yourself and what you'll need to do it. A quick heads up. This isn't a tutorial for developers or advanced users, and we're not doing a local installation. This is strictly a server installation, okay? That means we won't be installing anything on Windows or Mac OS. Yeah, we're going to look at this in great detail, really going through it step by step. The best thing to do is just pause the video whenever you want to follow along with the steps yourself. And so I'd say before we start the installation itself, because it's pretty extensive, let's first check what we actually need. And for that, the best place to look is the Shopware 6 documentation. A little tip right here. You can actually find everything there in writing, whether it's about the installation or the general functionality of Shopware 6 itself. Yeah, everything is described down to the smallest detail so that you could theoretically work your way through it there. But I'd say, like I said, let's move on and I'll see you in the documentation. As you can see here, we're starting right away with the system requirements for Shopware 6. So what does Shopware actually need to be able to run? What do I need to install and what do I really need to know? And then of course, there's the question of what kind of system this all runs on. What are we even talking about here? Well, basically, we're talking about a web server, right? We need to host this somewhere. If you don't have a server or a hosting plan, you can always feel free to contact us, and our sales team will be happy to help you find the right hosting partner. Then you can, build your installation and get everything set up there. Exactly. Let's dive right in. Generally, we recommend running Shopware 6 on an Ubuntu system, so Linux, right? You can, of course, use another Unix-based system. That's not a problem at all. Like I said, we just recommend it because we've had, positive experiences with it, and it simply offers the best compatibility. Okay, let's scroll down a bit further here. What else do we need? We definitely need PHP. So Shopware runs on PHP. Here you can see some extensions that you'll also need depending on what you want to do. It's all listed right here, which means you can go through the list or just have everything installed at once. For example, if you have a managed server with a hosting provider, these things are usually all pre-installed. For example, and this is also very important, we have the version we need listed here. That means we need a PHP version from 8.2 to maybe 8.4. You can always take a look and see what the current sweet spot is for your installation or what your own requirements are for PHP. And then you just install what you wanna. Generally, just go with the latest version. Exactly. Then next, we have a memory limit, which should be at least 512 or higher. And then there's the max execution time, 30 seconds or higher. Exactly. That's another configuration that you should set in PHP. Exactly, to get the whole thing up and running afterward. As I said, if you have managed hosting, usually don't have to worry about these things as it's all pre-configured. The hosting providers generally know exactly what Shopware needs and sometimes even perform the installation themselves. Nevertheless, we'll just take a look at it in detail. Next, we need Composer, either 2.2 or higher. It's also an important part of Shopware. Then we have SQL. What is SQL? SQL is the database system. Yeah, Shopware, of course, generates a lot of data and it has to be written somewhere. And we can do that either with MySQL 8.0 or higher, or with MariaDB 10.11 or higher. There are also versions listed here that might not be compatible right now, or that you maybe shouldn't install. That's why, aside from this video, it's always worth taking another look at the documentation, which you can find at docs.shopware.com. And there you can see what the current status is for the current version and what you need. It's just important that you know this page exists, and you can look there to see exactly what the right points are for you. Next, we have a little performance tip here, right, to set the maximum allowed packets to a minimum of 32 MB. There's also a description explaining the why and how, and a few more things. On one hand, we also need an Apache. There's no other way. Here too, 2.4 or higher with an active mod rewrite. Exactly, and Nginx can also be used. You just have to see what you prefer. I like, Apache is always recommended first. Then we have Zend Opcache. It should be set to 256M or higher. Exactly, and all the other things. I don't want to read all of this out in too much detail, because that makes the whole thing sound more complicated than it actually is. As I said, on most servers, you'll probably already have these things pre-configured. And going through every single option would probably go beyond the scope of this video. I think the installation itself will take a little while. Accordingly, it's just important that we skim over it. And for further, compatibilities, there's also OpenSearch, Elasticsearch, Redis, Varnish, and Node.js. But I'll be honest right now, we don't need to worry about that today. Yeah, when it's really just about you getting an understanding of the installation, these are more, I'd say, the pro-level stuff. You usually have a developer with you who explains what that means. So, what is Redis or Varnish, for example? Yes, that's, I'd say, a bit of the advanced knowledge. Exactly. And now I'd say let's jump to my desktop and I'll just establish a connection to the server. And then we'll see how to get Shopware on there in the first place. So I've already opened the download page for Shopware 6, where we can get what we absolutely need, which is the shopware installer.far.php file. Yes, so at shopware.com/en/download, we can download it at any time for the latest version. If you're watching this video later, it's also possible that a different version's already listed here. Of course, you can also download Shopware directly as a whole from GitHub. However, I would recommend just downloading this file first and then proceeding with it. What we have to do next, once we have the file, is to put it on our server. So, nothing too complicated, but really just upload the whole thing to the web directory, where our domain will also be routed to later. What does that mean? If you have hosting, the files are stored on the server, and then you have a www.shop.com or similar that points to this directory. And it's precisely into this directory that we want to place this file now, so that it can then, yes, do something. We'll go into that in more detail later. If all of this isn't quite working for you yet, it's best to contact your hoster directly, or, of course, us, and we'll help you out, so that, as I said, it happens as quickly as possible. Because, as I said, with a management system, which I also mentioned earlier in the system requirements, you won't have these problems because everything is already pre-configured and the hoster has already taken care of it for you. Yes. Yeah. And then I'd say, I'll first establish a connection to the server, and then we'll take a look at how it works. So what you see here now is an FTP interface, or rather, an FTP client. In this case, it's called FileZilla. There are plenty of others, like WinSCP, for example. Some hosters, depending on where you are, also offer web interfaces where you can just upload the files. Basically, FTP, the so-called file transfer protocol, is just for transferring files. In our case, I now have the Shopware installer file here locally, nicely displayed on the left side, and on the right side is the server, or rather the web directory, that the domain we'll be calling up will later point to. Yeah, if this routing, meaning domain to directory, isn't working for you yet, domain in this case means, for example, www.shop.de or .com. And if that's not quite working and you can't open it in the browser yet, I would recommend that you contact your hoster. But of course, you can also contact us if you need further help. Now, it's relatively simple and very well illustrated. I'll take the file and just drag it over to the server. I'll refresh once, and then we can already see the file has arrived. Of course, we could also do this whole thing directly via an SSH connection. But I thought, I'll spare us the terminal today. And I think, this way it's relatively easy to illustrate what's actually happening. Of course, we could also, as I said, do the whole thing via the terminal, then establish an SSH connection, download the file directly to the server, then we wouldn't even have to download it locally first, and then continue from there. But I think this way, it's relatively easy to understand what the goal was here. Yeah, and what this file does now, let's take a look in the browser by calling up our domain. Because that has definitely changed compared to recent years. It's no longer an installer file in the traditional sense that downloads everything directly, which we would then have to unpack or something, but rather everything else happens in the browser. So let's switch over. Once in the browser, it's very important that we call up the file we just installed and not just bluntly the domain. That means we now have the domain of my server here, yes, so video test and Lukowski and so on, .de. And after that, I've now written in the file name. But it could also be that in your case, there's something in between, some folder, which you would then have to specify as well, right? So the file itself really has to be called up. So what's actually different now, right? Well, we already have the installation interface right here, which we'll go through in detail in a moment. But you can already see a lot has changed. For example, there were times when you really had to unpack a .zip or .rar file on the server, and then all the files had to be manually dragged over first. Or other installation methods. Nowadays, the whole thing runs via Composer, which is why it's so important that it's already pre-installed on the server. And because of that, we don't have any more problems. So you've seen, it's super fast, it's super efficient, and you have hardly any errors that can happen. Yeah, so we've really just pushed the file over and called it up. And if everything was installed correctly beforehand, then it works immediately. So the first thing we can do here is select the installation language. It's important. I would definitely recommend selecting the correct language right away that you want to work with later. Afterwards, it can be a pain to change it, or sometimes not even really possible. So I'll just go with English here and then press continue. Then it asks a little bit, hey, we have different binaries of PHP here. Which one should we use? Usually you can just click on save and then you're good to go. Now we can also choose which Shopware version we want to install, which is also really cool. We no longer have to download a specific Shopware version. Instead, once we have the file, we can just pick one. For example, I can now say I want version 7.4.2 or 7.4.1 and so on. That's no problem at all. And then we just click on download, and what happens then is that all the files get downloaded. After a short wait, all the files are simply downloaded. So up here you can see it now, version 6.7.4.2 has been successfully placed on the server, all the files. And up here we can select the language we want to use for the installation. I can switch it to English, for example, since it was just in German, and then I can click my way through the installer, or rather through the installation setup. I'll just click on next here. Now comes a really nice part. It shows me, hey, is everything okay so far? For example, are all the extensions we saw earlier in the system requirements already installed? And it also shows me here, okay, you could adjust something here. That's a warning. You could make an adjustment there. But there are also, basically the red lights where something doesn't fit at all. And then you can quickly make adjustments and adapt things. If you need help with that, your host is the best person to assist you, or of course our support or our sales team. Just get in touch, and we'll find the right contact person for you. Now, we can also click Next here if everything is okay. Then we can, confirm the terms and conditions, and then we already have to enter the database information here. So what is this exactly? You usually get the access credentials for this from your host as well. I mentioned earlier with the system requirements that there's both MariaDB and MySQL. My server is running MySQL, and I really just have to, enter the data for my user here, and then I can create a new database where all the Shopware data will subsequently be, stored. I'll just quickly copy that in. After I entered the credentials for my database user, in this case, as I said, MySQL, it logged in directly and already looked up which databases are currently available. This means I get an overview. I already created an empty database for this video beforehand. But if you don't have a database yet, you can also just click on New Database here. Then you enter a name that doesn't exist yet, and then you can click on Start Installation. The thing is, this doesn't require any further configuration or anything. It just takes the empty database and pushes all the Shopware tables and so on into it. So you don't have to do anything with that. I'll still use my already created empty one here and then click on Start Installation. Okay, so now we can see it's going through all the steps. I think this is a great place to see just how powerful Shopware actually is. 1,492 datasets, tables, and so on are now being written into the database. And that's before we've even stored any data ourselves, like in the form of products or anything. Yeah, this is really just the skeleton, so to speak, that we need to be able to run Shopware. And I'm going to pause here for a moment, and then we'll be back as soon as the database installation is complete and we can continue with the configuration. So now we get the wonderful message that Shopware 6 has already been installed, that everything has worked out so far. If there's a green check mark, that's always great. If it's not there, then you'll probably get an error message at that point. Exactly, which you'll have to work with. We have a lot of troubleshooting and so on linked in our documentation with questions, so feel free to take a look. It would just take too long to go through every single individual case within this video. Accordingly, I'm just going to assume, especially if you have a hosting plan that's reasonably good, then it'll all just run through smoothly like this. So next, we have the option to click on Next here. We can enter our shop name, for example, the very creative shop name. Then I have the option to enter an email address here. I'll just use my personal one for now. This isn't the account email or anything, but the email from which mails will be sent later on. So, for example, the order confirmation will then be sent from this email address. We can then select the system language here for our administration, or rather I'd say the default language for Shopware 6 in general. This has nothing to do with the language your front end, meaning your shop itself, is displayed in for customers. You can do that in any language anyway. Then we also have default currency here. So which default payment currency is set here? We can, for example, select the dollar here. We can, instead of United Kingdom, also choose the United States of America. We can really adjust everything here, including the default country and so on. I think you get the idea. Additionally, we can pre-select a few languages here that we'd like to have. We can also say, include all of them right away. So that later in the administration, if you have multiple users, for example, who speak different languages, they can also select them directly in the administration. For example, you have employees, some are from the USA, others from Spain, then you could set English and Spanish here, and they can then simply set in their account what they want to see in the administration. Then we can also define available currencies here, right? Where we can then set what should actually be available. And we can create an admin account here for our administration. I'll do that real quick now. And then I can simply click Next. Okay, now we'll download all sorts of languages again. And here too, we quickly get a green check mark again. And once that's finished, then we've essentially completed the Shopware installation. And we can simply click on Continue to Shop, and we will then be redirected. This usually takes another short moment because it's essentially setting up the administration for the very first time and writing some things to the cache in the process. The first time we open Shopware, we still get this welcome screen, or this pop-up. In my opinion, this also belongs to the installation, so let's click through it. We can start by migrating shop data using our migration assistant. This means you can, for example, switch from a different shop system or from Shopware 5. Drag and drop your data, products, categories, and whatever else you have into Shopware 6. Or you can also install user demo data. This means that, for example, if this is going to be a test environment, you could have categories, products, and so on created for you to test Shopware. For example, if you subsequently plan to complete our user training, the demo data makes sense because you will already have created a lot of data here. And then you can easily gain your first experiences with Shopware. In my case, I neither want to perform a migration, nor will this subsequently become a test environment. Therefore, I do neither and simply click on Next. Now we can select a default sales channel. Here are two of them, the API channel, i.e. the headless channel, and the normal channel from our shop. I'll just take both and say that these are our default channels. As I said, it's also a very individual matter what you configure afterwards. The point now is simply to have seen it once. Either we can use our local email agent here in the next step. This means our emails are sent directly from Shopware. Or we can configure an SMTP server, if our hosting allows it, and send the emails through that. I'll just use the local one now and click Next once. We can then choose whether it is synchronous or asynchronous. I don't want to go into too much detail now because that would go a bit beyond the scope of this video. Therefore, we click on Next. So now we have the option to configure PayPal if we want to use it as a payment plugin. It's just very common. So we can then offer PayPal, debit card, credit card, invoices, and so on directly as payment methods for our customers. If we don't want that, we can simply click Skip here. On the other hand, we can click on Configure here, where we have to log in with our PayPal merchant account and so on. Everything will be displayed there. This isn't important for the video right now. Similarly, we can select further recommendations here, it's called extensions, and see again what's available for each region. I'll just ignore that for now and click on Next. Now comes a very important point. In theory, we don't have to log in here, but if you have a plan with us, you should definitely do it to be able to use the, well, let's say premium features of Shopware 6. That means just enter the email address and password for your Shopware account here. Be careful, this is not the same account you use to log into the administration, okay? So this is really about the Shopware account, yes, and the other is about your administration. So in this case, I'll skip this as well, because I don't plan on actively working with this right away. This is just about the installation process. I'll skip that. If we had logged in there, we would have already had the option to directly access the Shopware store, find more extensions, and so on. And here too, I'll just click on skip. And then it says, all done. That means we're finished. We've completed our installation, error-free, and we've gone straight through. Exactly. And if you have any questions about the installation, feel free to write them in our description. I'll definitely read through everything, and then we'll work together to make sure it runs smoothly afterwards. Right, very important. Regarding hosting, as I said, I've mentioned it quite often, it's best to contact your host directly because we're also we can only provide limited help and advice. We, of course, don't have direct access to your servers or anything like that. In that case, the host will always have to do that. Otherwise, we can, of course, always help you. Right. Now, last but not least, we just click on Finish, and then we'll land in the administration just as we wanted. We can also open the front end and start working with Shopware right away. I wish you the best of luck with your Shopware 6 shop, and I'll say, until next time, take care, and bye-bye.